Welcome, everybody. My name is Citizen Strife, and we're doing another episode of Strife Sanctum. And this week's episode is going to be a bit of a doozy. This is going to be a non-review. This is going to be something every so often I'm going to want to do stuff like this, like the 90s grab bag or some other thing. I'm thinking like maybe a movie or something like whatever, like from the 90s. Just to change things up. It's still going to be related to gaming and whatever to an extent. But something crossed my mind one day, and I was like, I've not done anything like this. At most, I've ranked the games, but I've not ranked the Final Fantasy final bosses. So when talking about this, I am strictly not doing like all of the bosses ever. I'm kind of going main bosses. If there is like a secondary villain or a final form or just something that really speaks to, okay, this is like a main villain aside from them, sure. This is also going to focus on Final Fantasies 1 through 10. I'm going to skip 11, 12, and 13, and then I'm going to skip 14 and then do 15. Not going to do any of the side quests or side content or anything like that. This is going to be strictly the mainline Final Fantasy games as I know them. And, you know, I don't know the MMOs. I just don't play them. So bear that in mind. So there's no like tactics or any of the other things like Final Fantasy X-2 or any of the trilogy for Final Fantasy 13. If I'm going to talk about 13, it's going to be the main game and be done there. As far as criteria, how would I even rank these bosses? Well, when I thought about it, I had to think not just what they mean to me as a person, because again, this is all favorite. I never ascribed to a theory of best anything, because there's no way you can put a an objective marker on a subjective thing. So at most, this is a favorites list. This is me ranking them by my favor of them. So how do I do that? Well, I have a couple of ideas in my head, and I jotted them down, and they ended up with, when I think about them, what immediately comes to mind. How effective they were. So, obviously, what was their plan? Some of them I knew right off my top of my head, and I'll explain them. Obviously, this would be spoilers. Derp, spoilers. So if you've not played any of them all or you don't know them all, they're all spoiled. Bear that in mind. I don't think you would click on this video and not understand that. But still, spoiler warning for the entire video as point of reference. But yes, how effective they were at the plan that they sought out to do. Or if they weren't out to do that, what did they do to, say, the party or to the world that they inhabited? Were they effective at that? There's also going to be, when I look at them, do I see that villain as something of a threat? Do I look at them and I think, okay, they're a threat, or that final boss form or what they do, I can see them really being a threat to me? Because that is going to make a lot of difference, because this is a suspension of disbelief. So a lot of people that are probably going to think of some of these on the list and wonder why they're so high or why they're so low, bear that in mind. This is not just how effective they were at succeeding in their task. It's how do I come across as a person doing the things that I'm doing versus another person doing a completely different task in a different game and doing a different thing. The pro wrestling analogy, suspension of disbelief. Brock Lesnar kicking the shit out of you makes absolute sense. The Undertaker spooking the shit out of you makes absolute sense. Some gangly looking fuck out of the crowd beating the shit out of you and being a champion of something. No. In the world that you're built in as, you have a set of rules. So, of that world and of that belief system, are you really that threatening? Do you look as you sound? Do you feel that you're coming across effectively based on the story that they're telling and the thing that they're doing. Because does it match up one-to-one with the visual that you are, and then the characterization that you have, and then the effects that you do? Does it all add up? So this is going to have some weight to it. Another point of call is, what dungeons do you inhabit, if any at all? Do you have a final dungeon? What does it look like? What is the aura of your place? Same goes with how you look, how you feel, how you sound, how you talk. What you do, what your final dungeon says about you, if you have one, does have an impact. And then, again, a final boss fight, if you have one. Or if there's a final boss that isn't your final form, well, what did that do? How effective was that? In a way, was the final boss, whether it was you as the main villain or some other person, was that effective? Well, we'll find out. So yes, bear that in mind, because I will say right off the bat, there are going to be a couple that you're going to probably thinking, like, what the fuck are they doing there? You'll see why as I do try to explain it. I wanted to put those caveats out there because I wanted to think through this, because this is one of those things that you do have to think about quite a bit, rather than just rattling off, this is my favorite, this is my favorite, this is my favorite, because I say it all the time. Sometimes I'm not great at it, and sometimes I go off the handle, and sometimes I don't do it properly, but I always try to explain a reason why something is or doesn't work to me, or isn't like as good as I think. And part of being a critic, I suppose, is critiquing certain aspects of things and not just, flying in the face of something that's bad or flying in the face of something that's good. It's, can you explain your point as to why this thing works or doesn't? So, of course, I will post as like at the, in a YouTube comment as a little bumper at the end, like, oh, if you're watching the video, this is that list. But if you look at it and you're like, huh? Well, you listen in, you'll know why. But I do try to make that list an important thing. And I can kind of rattle most of this off from my phone here. Normally, I would put in like a primer on my computer. I don't really have to. I just have to look at the character name and I'm good. So we'll just start. And we'll start with Final Fantasy III. Xande, who we hear is the leader of some guy, something, doing some bad in the Crystal Tower of something in some world. He's collecting crystals. Okay. When you fight him, he's hard as shit. He's got a Meteo and he kills your ass. But then you find out he's not the final boss. Instead, you go to this separate world with dark crystals, and you fight this being, this genderless fucking cloud known as the Cloud of Darkness. I will say that in Final, Dissidia, the redesign that they gave Cloud of Darkness is fucking fantastic, and they look great. But the final dungeon sucks. The Pixel Remaster gave a save point, but the Crystal Tower, you have to go in the Crystal Tower from the outside of another dungeon to get the Earth Crystal, go into the Crystal Tower, then you go down to a different tower, a different 8-level whatever, to get the super fun fucking jobs. You get those, and you climb all the way back up. If you want to save, you can save at the Crystal Tower, but go back up, fight Xande, hope you win, then hope you fight the other mid-bosses, and then fight the Cloud of Darkness and hope and pray you don't die. Because Cloud of Darkness only does one move in the original version. They do more in the remakes, but in Vacuum Wave or Wave of Darkness or whatever, if you can't survive it or can't survive 2 without healing, you're fucked. And then you have to start the battles all over again from the beginning of the Crystal Tower. So the final dungeon sucks. The mid-final boss sucks. The design of the dungeon sucks because you can't save until you do the Pixel Remaster or you save states. And the void, it's this ephemeral thing that happens. I will take everything back to the void, and it's just there. And they look interesting, but as a character, they're not interesting. So they ended up at the bottom. Rounding out the bottom as well is the Emperor from Final Fantasy II. He succeeds in something, I guess. He blows up a town and burns it to the ground and sends people after you. But it's one of those things where he doesn't really do it himself. He just sits in a chair and then you fight him after a while and then you do the thing and then you fight him. He's not really that hard, but then he comes back and he says he's taken over hell and then he fights you again and then it happens and it's like, okay. Suffice to say, he's a little harder than the Cloud of Darkness, and at least he's done something to your party. And it's just what? And sure, these were early Final Fantasy games. A lot of these early Final Fantasies are going to be tougher to find bosses for because there's not the advent of voice acting or cinematics, to fill the thing, But, and again, the dialogue was not the best way back when. But Final Fantasy 2 still had some merit to it, and the story was a lot darker. But Emperor didn't get to do much. Even in the re-releases, they retranslated him, and he's just kind of there. I sit in a chair. Now I'm in hell. Now I took over hell. Now I'm the big bad guy. Oh no, I've got the blood sword. Oh no, I died in one hit. Oh no. So yeah, he's at near the bottom. Not quite Cloud of Darkness and Zonde, but yeah, not great. Next up, this might be a little controversial, but Garland and Chaos from Final Fantasy 1. Note, I am not talking about Strangers of Paradise or Dissidia. In Dissidia, he's voiced by Keith David, and I'm absolutely okay with that. Garland was voiced by Chris Sabat from Funimation, and Chaos was voiced by Keith David from fucking Gargoyles. I'm like, and countless other movies and stuff. It's like, you got Keith David to be your main villain. Like, that's points in my book. But I'm talking strictly Final Fantasy 1, and Final Fantasy 1 is like, we get rid of the guy, he says the line that he will knock you all down, and then he's not there. And then you find out he's been doing this weird time loop thing, and he's been creating this fantasy of these warriors of light and trying to revive himself as Chaos, but still be Garland, but still be Chaos, and then bring the fiends into the thing, and it's like, fuck. So the final boss is hard as shit, depending on what your situation is, depending on your levels and your loadout. But the time loop thing is confusing and weird, and it reminds me that even back then, Final Fantasy was doing some weird ass shit. So Garland gets points for the goofy one-liner. The fact that Chaos is voiced by Keith David, but as a whole, I mean, it's the first Final Fantasy game. You're not expecting the world, I guess, but in terms of effectiveness, like, it's a time loop, time travel, and weird. Like, we'll get to this with Ultimecia later. It's a weird fucking thing, and the rules of time travel and weirdness, like, you don't even notice that the time travel thing happens because it looks the same dungeon as it always does, just a bigger version of it. You're fighting the bosses over again. You have no like interpretation. You're in the past, so it's like, what? Whatever. So that is what it is. So next up, we have Bartandalus from Final Fantasy 13. I struggled to put Vayne and Bartandalus 1 and 2, 2 and 1. I took Bartandalus down because he has a cool boss fight, but I don't know if his motivations work that good. When I looked up, because again, I think his motivations are cool in a way, but it does stand to reason that the mechanics of Final Fantasy 13, the way they described how it works, the fal'Cie do the l'Cie, and they turn to the Seath if they don't feel their focus, that shit. The main plot, as I can tell, was he was trying to find a way back to his maker, or a version of himself. He is a fal'Cie. So he and other people or other beings want to be together again, and all together. His plan is to destroy Orphan, but he cannot do so because of a failsafe. So his idea is, I'll just take some scrub humans and force them into this weird situation. So he's doing the manipulative, weird bullshit again, rather than doing most of the work himself. That only accounts for so much. His boss fights are cool because he looks like a fucking tank with a fucking stretched out face. It's kind of creepy as shit. But his plan of trying to destroy Cocoon because people don't want to turn into crystal beings, like, that's cool and all, but I don't know if it ever worked out to his satisfaction, because what gives him some benefit is he's just some old guy, some old priest. He's not like this 25-year-old hot dude trying to kill you, that shit. But I don't know if he was ever that impressive. Final Fantasy 13 only goes so far in the story mechanics. They do okay, but when you have a lot of the story bits missing and the context missing, it's really ineffectual. And that's why he gets some points, because you still have a decent voice actor and decent setup, but there's only so much you can do with those when you don't have the oh, he did all of this crazy shit. Well, he manipulated all of that, but do I see him doing half of the stuff that he's doing? No, because he's just kind of sitting in a chair until he turns into a tank guy. It's not great. Vayne is kind of the same way. Vayne in Final Fantasy 12. Final Fantasy 12 is weird. It tries for a political intrigue story, so bear that in mind when a lot of this comes into play. He's orchestrating Game of Thrones style his ascent to doing the thing to become the dynast king. He needs to take over not only his realm, but other realms and do this shit so that he can no longer feel threatened by these Ocuria, these weird ephemeral beings that run and orchestrate the world. So his whole idea is, I will take over this and this and this and this by orchestration and fucking around everybody I know and doing all this stuff behind the scenes. And, it's fine to an extent. What really lets down Final Fantasy 12 is a couple of things. Is they spend a lot of time not really doing much. Halfway through the game, most of your aim is to go to Arcades, and then most of the time you're dealing with Dr. Sid, who leads you into the whole Vena and Ocuria thing as a weird, like, nethicite creating nut job kind of thing, which is cool. But then the final dungeons really drag. You don't even face off against Vayne in the Bahamut himself. You go through the dungeon, like this big fucking tower dungeon to fight Sid. That's cool. But then you go to the Bahamut, then you deal with Vayne, but he's not on there. He's actually back over Rabanastre, I think, and then you blow it up, and then you don't blow it up, and you do a thing. It's kind of weird. And then he turns into Nethicite. So you can see where I'm kind of like, he's got his motivation. He wants to rule the world and then take it over and not feel like he's threatened by gods. It's an inverse of what Barthandelus is doing, but he never came across as somebody that was really like doing most of the work. And that accounts for a lot. A lot of the characters that I aspire to on this list are the people that are either going to do the work or have done something to the party that it really feels like they've done something. You could say that Vayne has orchestrated the downfall of Bosch and Ash and saw Vaughn's brother die, but did Vayne do it himself? No, he ordered it. And Gabranth did most of the work. It's kind of so again, I'm kind of on it. The next we get Golbez from Final Fantasy IV. Same idea. What really hurts Golbez, I think, is that he's not the final boss. You give him all this crazy shit that he can do, and you even have that squeaky scene on the floor where he's beating the shit by Rydia, only for his grabby hand to grab the crystals, and this kind of ends up being a Final Fantasy III situation where he's not even the final boss. You find out he was manipulated, so he manipulates Kain. He manipulates everybody else in his party, only to find out he himself was manipulated by a guy who just wanted to destroy things. Zemus, who turned into Zeromus, and then you did the Big Bang, and then you fought the Big Bang. The benefit is, like, Golbez, like, he's higher on the list because of, like, his association with Zeromus and things. Like the Zeromus fight is hard, and Golbez himself has a connection tentatively with Cecil, but they don't really explore it. Golbez benefits from being in a game I enjoy, but he himself is just kind of there, which is really frustrating. Like, I think you could kind of put any of the last three kind of in any order, and I'm not going to argue, because they do things, or they have people do things for them, but they're not really all that effective. And then we're still getting into where is the effectiveness? What is the intent? And then we get into Final Fantasy X. And we have Seymour, Sin, and Yu Yevon, all kind of in a thing. You could put Yunalesca in there, but I don't think she's really integral to the plot as a major villain. She's just there as your obstacle villain, and as effective as that is. But Seymour is the main guy, because Sin can't be. Sin is effective at destroying everything. As a force of nature villain, absolutely devastating. Destroys Kilika, tries to destroy Luca, tries to destroy lots of things. Sin is Jekt, so he has a point to being involved with Tidus. Why Tidus is there. And he has the connection to Yuna because Seymour's trying to take him over and then being this godlike thing. But then you realize that Seymour is just kind of a numpty, and he doesn't, like, I don't know where that word came from, but you can see it's like he's trying so hard to be threatening and then doesn't really. Some of his boss fights are just there. He is the perfect, like, I'm here to fuck your day. But then you think about what his motivations are. Early on, it makes sense because Yuna's being manipulated, and then he confronts you and then sticks anima on your ass. That makes sense. But after every step, you start questioning whether Seymour is actually effective or not, because you think, okay, why does he want Yuna's help to become Sin when she's already said she's not going to do it? Is he going to force her to do it? Like, how would he do that? Is he going to kill all of us? Well, that wouldn't work because he's trying to kill Yuna. I don't know. Could he manipulate another summoner to do the thing for him? I don't know. So he's basically kind of just giving away his plan. All the while doing the stuff as killing Kimahri's brethren and all that stuff. That's cool and all, but his plan just kind of goes off on Bonkersville the more times you meet him, and then by the fourth fight, you can just hit him with the Mega Sisters or Anima and kill him in one shot, and then it's just, well, nope, bye. So Seymour gets docked points because he doesn't cut that impressive of a figure, whether he's a manipulative sucker or not. His boss fights can be trouble because the third boss fight sucks. The second one's hard, but the third one, Flux, sucks. Well, I forget if it's Notice or Flux, but I remember the third fight on Gagazet. It sucks balls. It is one of the hardest fights in the game, so he gets points there. But as I've said, Sin is an effective terror. Everybody knows what Sin is. You know he's always there. There's Sin spawn there. There's always going to be something there trying to threaten their world. And then they have all the stuff that they talk about. Final Fantasy X was great at giving you context clues for every single thing that they were doing. So they built up this myth in your head. You knew what Sin was from attacking Xanarkand, but now you really understand what he's trying to do. But then you get to the final boss, and then you realize Yu Yevon just wants to summon. So it's not even a guy anymore. It's not some mythic figure. You know, it doesn't even get a cool final dialogue. Like, Jekt is your final boss, but not really, because then they do the thing where you got to fight your summons, and then you got to fight Yu Yevon, who turns out to be a tick or a flea, because he turned into a thing that just wants to summon Sin, and Yu Yevon just fucking bleh. You can't even fucking die in that boss fight. So it's like, between Seymour fucking things up royally with his plan way too fucking early for it to help, Sin, is effective, and that's the best part of it, but Yu Yevon really kind of... They don't stick the landing with that final boss at all. Even if you want to assume that Jecht himself is the final boss, you kind of have to walk into that fight blind to fuck up. Because he's much like Zeromus in that he does a lot of physical damage. Sometimes he'll do a status effect, but really, you can power level the shit out of these characters, even more so than other games, so that he's not a threat. I'm not going to dock it that many points. Jecht is still awesome. The final boss is still effective in cool strategy ways if you don't want to just break the game open. But in terms of overall effectiveness, having Yu Yevon being this nothing, it makes even Zeromus look more threatening, because Zeromus is at least this big pile of screaming blue shit that's trying to blow you up. Yevon is just a tick. He casts Curaga on himself. You can use Zombie to cast Curaga on him and keep doing it, or use Zombie Strike in Phoenix. It's dumb. It just is dumb. Let's see. So now we get into one. This is going to be one that could have been higher, but also is kind of low for me, but still in the grand scheme of things is kind of in the middle. And because we've had that discussion, Lee and I, we did this in Final Fantasy VIII, was Edea and Ultimecia. And if the game had ended at Disc 2, it would have been, but Edea would have been, this conniving, psychopathic, she killed a dude, she's trying to do the thing, and she's wrecking the world as they are. But going back to Final Fantasy 1, time travel is a bitch, and you don't know what the fuck's going on, so they do Disc 3, and they did Disc 4. You find out Edea is not really the main villain, so it's Ultimecia this whole time. But going back to Presence, we don't physically see Ultimecia. We only see her twice. We see her once in a flashback when Squall's going off into space and the weird shit that is, and then her dungeon. So her plan is to rewrite all of the world in this time compression bullshit so that she's the only one that exists. So she's venturing for Eleni and blowing shit up in her path, and that's great, but she herself is not doing any of the work. She's doing it through a proxy, and again, I think the most effective villains are going to be the ones that are doing the work themselves. So even though Ultimecia is Edea the whole time, all of that is Ultimecia's work. It stands to reason I'm just not as invested in her as a villain, because we don't fight her until the final boss. The final boss fight's really fucking cool, because you fight her, then you fight her demon Griever, then you fight her in this weird amalgamation form, and then you fight her in the super final boss, I just want to destroy everything and it goes back to zero kind of, But the music is great. And it also extends to her final dungeon. And this is one of those things where the final dungeon and the ambiance of the final bosses give points where the allure of the character themselves kind of fall flat. The anticipation of knowing what the dungeon looks like and then realizing, oh shit, it's Castlevania. This is a Castlevania dungeon right away. This is fucking great. The mechanics of the dungeon are weird and can be a little wonky, but fighting 8 bosses and going through this crazy-ass place while the organ is playing, it just adds this unique dimension. Because a lot of final dungeons are, hey, we're going through a ruin, or we're going through a cave, or we're going to the moon, and we're, it's all good. This is a gothic set piece. So between all the gothic shit going on, giving you Castlevania vibes with Uematsu going nuts on the organ, to Ultimecia herself having a decent set of final boss encounters, because they're all different in their own way. They're not the hardest, fuck no, but they're all distinct, and she herself is the final boss, so they at least give you that. So they wuss out midway through the game, but they don't just give up and give you the, with Yu Yevon, you could say he was the final boss ish, 4 or 5 hours before the end of the game. So you had some leeway. Ultimecia gives you 20 hours left to go. So if you want to, 10, 15 hours left in the game, depending on what you're doing, you still know that she's the one doing all this shit. I'm not as big a fan of her doing it via proxy because of spooky time manipulation and shit, time possession and all that crap. But still, the aura of her is something to behold, even if her character is curse all seeds, you shall die, and whatever, So there's only so much she gets, but she still has points in her favor. Now, number 5 is going to be one that is going to question a lot of people, because there's probably a couple that would have thought, what? That guy? And it's going to end up being an Ultimecia situation again, where a lot of stuff about him doesn't seem all that great until you recognize a lot of the other stuff about him. And I'm talking about X-Death from Final Fantasy V. So, again, I'm sure this is going to be a weird one, so let me explain. Why would he be in a top 5 Final Fantasy villains ranking? There are a couple reasons. His motivation. Until Neo X-Death, Neo X-Death is just, I want to end all existence because Void bullshit. He wants to send everything to Void and rule all existence because he is a nasty tree that became sentient through amalgamations of demons, and he is the embodiment of nature saying, fuck you, you suck, I'm taking revenge. I can get behind that. I can totally get behind something basically saying, you fucked up nature, I'm coming to take my vengeance on all of you fuckers, whether you like it or not. So he opens up the gates to his world and then merges them together. So weird sciencey bullshit and, dimensional warpage and planetary bullshit. But still, once he absorbs the end zone, he can just nope all of your people. Nope all of your people. Take Lena and nope her out in the middle of nowhere, so she ends up fighting you in a fight. In the midst of this, he actually succeeds in something that no other character had done for a while, and that's kill a main character. And unlike Final Fantasy IV, they didn't wuss out this time. X-Death, in the midst of, the fight, I guess you could say Galuf just died to exhaustion, I suppose, rather than being stabbed or whatever. But in the midst of fighting X-Death, Galuf dies. And that's a really crazy scene. He's just gone. What does diminish it is that Cryo or Kara take his powers immediately, so it's almost like all the shit he did never happened, But you're still using a different character. He's dead. He's gone. He shows up in a scene at the end of the game as a oh my god, you're gonna save our planet and save our world, But he's dead. X-Death was the cause of it. Galuf lost his life fighting X-Death. So X-Death was still effective in the end zone. He was still effective destroying part of your party. So you have a personal stake in trying to get rid of this guy. Even if his figure is, I've turned into a splitter to infect you and whatever. That stupid shit. But there's also other things. Much like Ultimecia, his boss fight in the second world is fucking hard to an extent. His boss castle is really fucking cool because it's a 2-parter. It's a driving, forceful, I'm gonna get through the big bridge and do the castle with Gilgamesh, and that's cool shit. And then you go climb up the thing, and it's a crazy rush to the tower. Only it's a fake tower, and then you realize what it looks like, and there's all these red fucking lava and bones on the wall. They like, they make these weird gesticulating. It's just fucking ugly. There are points to be had again for a dungeon looking like a fucking mess. So he gets that one, and then you fight him again in the end zone. And the end zone is a pretty cool amalgamation of places, and you fight a bunch of bosses, but it's a cool, okay, you go through this place, then you go through this, then you go through another set of things, and then you fight X-Death himself. Decently hard. The evil tree wants to fucking eat you, that makes sense. But then Neo X-Death shows up. And he's fucking difficult. this was like the last time a final boss felt super fucking hard in a Final Fantasy game. Like 9 to an extent. But I mean, 5, unless you're really, really prepped, or like basically just cheese it with fucking samurai, like Gil Toss or something. I mean, you can effectively nerf the fight with Chemist too. There's that method. But he not only does what Zeromus does and does a shit ton of damage, but he's got like Grand Cross, which does multiple fucking status effects. So he's trying to kill you from multiple angles, and he's got multiple forms, and he's got multiple entities, and they take a shit ton of damage. So it's a freaking hard boss fight. So even if the mechanics of the character himself and the things he says and the I've taken you over, it's very stock. A lot of the mechanisms that X-Death does and has to his disposal are more effective than a lot of other villains in the Final Fantasy series. I would have never really thought of that until making a list like this, because it's like, I would have never put X-Death at 5, right? But when you think about the things he is able to do to the party, it starts to slowly sink in that there's something there, I'm not saying he's the most effective, no, but he's certainly in that sphere if you look hard enough. But then there's the tier of people that are absolutely effective and you don't have to think about it. So we'll start at number 4. So ranked 4 is Sephiroth and Jenova from Final Fantasy VII. I'm not one of these people that tries to weigh whether Kefka or Sephiroth are the better or the more iconic. Shut up. I don't do that shit. You can do what you want, but I'm merely thinking from how effective were they? What did they do? To me, I think Sephiroth works as a myth. I talked about this in the Final Fantasy VII review that will probably go after this, but Sephiroth is a myth. What does Sephiroth himself do? He burns down Cloud's village. He goes fucking apeshit. He is a myth. He is a super soldier of epic proportions. What if Captain America turns into fucking Batman, but then turns into Carnage, basically? Or what if Batman turns into Carnage or whatever the fuck? I don't know. But he just goes apeshit. Right? He burns down Cloud's village. He stabs Tifa. You've got that going for you. He beats the shit out of Zack. Cloud is all fucked up and stabs him, and he goes into the pit, and he dies, and he goes into the planet. But then you find out the real reason this is still working is that Jenova, inside him, is doing the Ultimecia thing, where she is taking over, and all the things you see after that point are Jenova's doing, mostly. Sephiroth still has a will to exert, but he as a character ceases to be. Jenova ends up being the character that does all of the work, but what she does do is pretty fucking impressive. She stabs the president of a multi-billion or trillion-dollar company. She ends up beating up the shit out of a snake and stabbing it through a tree. Ew. She takes over fucking every place and causes chaos using Sephiroth's will and testament as a myth. So Sephiroth's still kind of doing the thing, but Jenova's really the one, compelling him to do all the shit. And then she's the one you're always fighting. You're not really fighting Sephiroth until the end. So it's a weird kind of symbiotic, parasitic kind of thing going on. But Jenova's the one who stabs Aerith and tells Cloud he's a puppet, and she keeps using Sephiroth as that vessel to do all that. So you can't really talk about one without talking about the other, because Jenova knows that Sephiroth has this ingrained myth about him. And a lot of like the early first disc going forward is finding Sephiroth, and she's appearing in his form to do all this, taunting you and hurting you and doing all the shit. Come find me after I've wrecked your party. She stabs Aerith. Boom. She's dead. She's gone. She wants to summon Meteor, so they do it. The idea being that if the meteor falls, spirit energy will be collected and they will become godlike. So you have to stop them both. So it ends up becoming a situation where both Sephiroth and Jenova have to be stopped at the same time. And they both kind of work together This isn't like Idea is just completely nothing. I mean, Idea is there as a vessel, but Sephiroth has his own. I've done some crazy shit myself, and I'm a super soldier, so everyone from Shinra, everyone from the world, everybody knows the myth of this man in a black cape. And Final Fantasy VII was super effective at giving you this mythic figure that you had to fight, all the while teasing you with this force of nature villain in Genova that in her own right will fucking murder your ass. So between having those boss fights, and there weren't the hardest boss fights in the world, I'm not saying that, but going to the North Cave, doing all this stuff, you had a like personal vendetta against both of them because of what they've done. Cloud himself is willed on by doing all of the things. Almost everything that the party's trying to do was caused by Sephiroth, Genova, or Shinra. So it all ties in, and it all gives you this kind of backdrop of, yeah, we want to kill them. Yeah, I think we want to kill them. It also helps that Sephiroth has that look. He has a striking look. He has a gigantic sword. He fucking murders people. He will fucking murder you. And yeah, you have the Lego hands. They look like, they look like empty toothpaste cans, But when you get the sequence of Sephiroth and he's fucking badass, he does badass things. He looks pretty fucking intense. Still has a bit of, sort of effeminate, but not really. They veer into that way more with Kuja and Seymour. Way more, to be honest. But Sephiroth's voice acting, whether it's from, maybe not Lance Bass, but George Newbern or the newest guy from Remake. I really should know who those people are other than Erica, but I don't fucking know. I'm stupid. Anyway, but yes, whether it's the newborn Advent Children version or the recent remake version, there's still an effect. Because you're playing, even in the remake, you're playing off the Sephiroth myth. But that myth is so strong that you're still driven to it. But he's still, whether it's via Genova or by himself, is effective at doing a lot of the work himself. So that puts him above Adia and Ultimecia, that puts him above Seymour, that puts him above other people who do some of those things, but are still more manipulative in essence. They still manipulate, but then they still, I want to stab, so I'll do it, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. So Sephiroth's at number 4, and it's totally fine. And number 3, when you hear this, you're probably going to scream. Kefka at number 3. Kefka from Final Fantasy VI is 3rd on my list. And before you say anything, I understand. I totally understand why would I put the guy everybody says is the best villain ever. I will grant you, he's very effective. He does the poisoning of Doma. He enslaves Terra. He messes with Celeste and Locke all the time. He does all this crazy shit. He manipulates the Espers and takes them over. And then just when you think the game is about to be over and Gestalt is going to do the thing, Kefka just decides, nope, I'm just going to stab and I'm just going to kill. In terms of effectiveness, Kefka is top notch. And even like the myth of Kefka and the end of the game, the Fanatics Tower, that stuff's cool. And as good as Kefka is, there's something about Kefka that I want to express that I think gets overblown a little too much. Because again, I am trying to rank these people as villains. Kefka is an effective villain. His look, his feel is what drives him down for me. He is a court jester. He is the Final Fantasy Joker. And while that is a charismatic and an alluring presence, he looks like a fucking fruitcake. All this green and red and white makeup and we really well done. Welcome to my barbecue. He's got the laugh. That sort of thing. It's cool. It's a cool idea. But I talked before about, is he that threatening looking? anytime you meet him, he's doing these like one-liners. He's throwing a guy in his way, and it's like, wait, he says, do I look like a waiter? Even in the final boss, he just kind of throws in a weird line. It's like, oh, you people are infuriating. You're talking about us like it's a self-help novel. A final boss should kind of come across as not as a tryhard, right? That's where my thought process is. You can do all the things that Kefka does, but at the end of the day, Kefka ends up faltering because he's a goofy motherfucker doing goofy things. It just... Joker is effective, but he's not an effective villain most of the time. He does bad shit, but when push comes to shove, Batman's gonna kick the shit out of him 100 times out of 100. Anytime the party would kick Kefka's ass, I'm sure they could do that. Because he just comes off as a squirrely, weirdo, fruitcake motherfucker. And you can hear it in my voice. I'm just kind of... So, as great of a villain as Kefka is, as cool as it was that he was one of the first, if not the first, to blow up the world, because on that day, the world was changed forever, taking none of that away. Because remember, I'm still ranking him third out of like 13 or 14 different people. So this isn't like some derisive comment. I'm saying automatically putting him at number one doesn't really add up when you're faced with some other things. He does have some great effectiveness, but it's brought down by the suspension of disbelief that this weird-ass fucking Joker dude is now suddenly the ruler of the world because he had the epiphany to just, stand there in the statues and wreck face and he just does things to the sake of doing things. It's chaotic and fun, but I don't know if I would classify him as threatening. That's really the point, is he's not threatening to me. He's effective without the threat and the fangs to be a threat. Whether his final boss forms are cool and his final boss theme, they're fucking good. And it's a cool dungeon to just be surrounded by a pile of garbage. But putting him at the top of the Final Fantasy food chain because of the things he's done, there's more to a villain than that. Which is why the last two, I have to, do mental gymnastics, I suppose. But when you realize how effective they are, you can kind of see my point. Because number 2 on my list of Final Fantasy villains or Final Fantasy final bosses is Kuja from Final Fantasy IX. I don't think Kuja gets enough credit. I really don't. I absolutely think Kuja deserves a lot of credit for some of the shit that he does, because he's the manipulative sort. But when it comes to shove, he will do a lot of the things himself, much like Kefka did. But the difference is, as weird and kind of effeminate and theatrical as Kuja is, it comes off sort of cold and detached and kind of like not psychotic until it has to be. You can see him kind of having a through line throughout the entire game. He's driven and determined. He has a plan and a plot. It's not revealed immediately, but you can see all of the little things that he's always doing. He's always there. He's creating Braun as this psycho killer queen, and then she's the boss for a while, but then you realize that he's there. He's kind of manipulating things in the background, and then you realize he's the one creating all the black mages, so he's got an effect on Vivi. He's been fucking around with Garnet's mother, so Garnet has an effect. Then you realize he's in with Zidane, so Zidane has a purpose. So almost everybody except, I'd say, Amarant and Quina have a reason for wanting, Kuja gone. He took over Freya's home village and home city, so she wants him dead. Quina is just there because fuck it, and then Amarant is there because I'm too cool for school. Who like me because I'm dumb, that sort of thing. So most of the main cast, not just for plot reasons but for character reasons, have a reason to want Kuja dead. And again, he doesn't have that same I'm a goofy guy for the sake of being goofy. He's theatrical and whimsical, but he doesn't always need to be. So you realize that he's doing all of this crazy shit for a purpose. He's not just there blowing shit up because it's fun and I like it, you know. So there's points. The final dungeon is really cool, though it's not really direct to Kuja, but it's direct. Memoria is a really cool idea. Similar to Final Fantasy V in the end zone, but instead of reusing assets, they used like blown up versions of new stuff. Like they blow up Alexandria again. They show the storm where Garnet was thrown off and the village was burned. All the invincible stuff where he raises Alexandria to the fucking ground. This guy does a lot of shit. And yes, Garnet blows. I think Garland himself, and you add an into it. So Garland blows up Garnet's home, but Kuja's the one trying to get Alexander. So he's still doing a lot of damage with Bahamut, who he stole, from Garnet, all that stuff. And then he realizes he can take Garland over and then tries to do it all. He tries to take all of the power for himself, only to realize he's mortal. He can't accept that. He has a fear of death. He has an inferiority complex to Zidane, which is totally understandable. If you're a perfectionist, inferiority complexes are the worst fucking thing you can think of, because you always think somebody's better than you, and it drives you insane. So you can realize that Kuja just goes ape shit on his home planet and just says, fuck all you, you're gonna die. So you have another reason to want him. So you realize, looking back, Kuja, at first glance, he's a weird dude in a codpiece, and he's all pale and white, and it doesn't, no, much like Kefka, he doesn't, cut an imposing figure. But by nature of being almost as effective, if not more so, as Kefka, having a final confrontation in a final situation that would have been effective if they hadn't fucking wussed out, and done so many other things, Kuja deserves his place. But I do have to put the elephant in the room. He's not the final boss. Necron is. If you had Kuja have all of Necron's powers, just a secondary final form, and just said, hey, I had a come to Jesus moment. I realize what I've done, and I'm going to save you. And then Zidane is like, I want to save you too. You could have still done all that crazy shit. Through in lieu of fighting, Zidane has been able to convince Kuja to stop his rampage in his dying moments because he cares, only to die again. Necron is supposed to be a thing you're supposed to fight. And it's a love letter to the Final Fantasy IVs and Final Fantasy IIIs and Final Fantasy Vs, where you have the crazy, weird void villain and all that shit. He comes out of nowhere. You could justify it any way you want. He's the inverse of the Aoife tree. He's the siphoner of souls and collector of souls. That's Final Fantasy IX is fucking weird at the end of Disc 3. I'm just gonna fucking say it. It's fucking weird. They bend over backwards to try and talk about these people on this planet are trying to take over this other planet, and they come up with this weird ass fucking method to do it. And Necron was the center of it all? No. He was the byproduct of it all? I don't fucking know. A lot of people don't like him. So Kuja, I try to distance him away from Necron, and I kind of can't. Because Kuja on his own, if he was the final boss and given the second form with all of the, hey, Blue Shockwave, Grand Cross, Neutron Ring, all this crazy shit, because Necron's a hard boss fight, because he's got protective magics and heals and all this crazy shit he does to kill you, that could have worked. It could have been the best. But it wasn't. Kuja does all the things Kefka does without being the weirdo fucking chaotic mess that he is. But because Necron exists, and he's not the final boss, it kind of falls flat. So as much as I like Kuja, and as much as I like Kefka and Sephiroth, and as cool as it is that X-Death snuck into the top 5, there is one guy that I've seen in Final Fantasy that has charmed me like no other character in Final Fantasy's done in years. You can have your Balthirs, that's great. You can have, Snows and Lightnings and Sarahs and even the boys in Final Fantasy 15 are great. But what really sells Final Fantasy 15 for me, and what really sold the end of Final Fantasy 15 for me, was Arden. He is my favorite Final Fantasy final boss. Because of one thing that he does that Kuja couldn't do, one thing that Kefka couldn't do, he's kind of like Jecht in the visual department. He's like if Jecht walked into a fucking gangster mob store and just dressed to the fucking nines. I talked before about Kefka being this kind of chaotic, like, I do chaotic evil because it's fun and I just do the stuff and it's effective. Cool. Kuja, he does all that crazy shit, but the look of him doesn't really aspire too much intimidation. Sephiroth, to an extent, has some intimidation to him. There are some final bosses that are intimidating looking, intimidating sounding, and they look like they can fuck your shit up. What really separates Arden from me, and I think this is something that they finally did, I mean, even to an extent with Bartandalus, was they got away from the pretty-looking, middle-aged, or, like, young adult, like, effeminate guy, and they went for a 30, 40-year-old, like, masterful, like, he is immaculately dressed, he immediately pops off the screen, and a lot has to be done, and this is the English version. I don't know about the Japanese version, but for me, when you first hear Arden speak, I'm the man of no consequence. He's got that disdain, but he's just leaps out at you in the same way Kefka would, but without the chaotic weirdness. He has the theatrical nature that Kuja does, but he's like, he dresses like Alucard from Hellsing, but he has the theatricality of like a Kuja, but it comes across as a different feel. I'm trying to explain this the best way I can. It feels different than any other Final Fantasy villain. It's like, what would the Emperor of Final Fantasy II be if he was set in modern day, right? But had a lot more deviousness to him, had a lot more seething hatred to him, had a lot more effectiveness to him. And before you wonder if he was an effective villain or not, think of what he's also done. I said before, I'm not a big fan of manipulative villains, because Arden still kind of does the, climb the social hierarchy of the Empire, that shit from behind the scenes. You still have that. The Kefka does the same thing. But I see him doing a lot of the things. I see him doing a lot of the things that I don't see Ultimecia doing. I see him doing a lot of things that a lot of the lesser villains don't do themselves. They usually let a lot of flunkies take care of the things that they... Arden is always around the party. He's kind of fucking with the party. You first meet him and he's leading you to a place, and then he offers you a ride out of your fucking hellscape because you're fighting Titan, and he's like, do you want a ride? I could offer you a ride if you think that would be grateful for you. And then he's like, he has this sense of superiority. Then he fucking takes your car. That car is one of the best things about the game. He just fucking yoinks the fucking car. And the Empire now has it. You gotta find it back. And then he's got all this other stuff that he's doing. So he's kind of in the background until later in the game when you get to Altissia. And again, my reasoning for putting him 1 is because he has that presence about him, but then he also does the thing. He stabs Luna Freya. You see him do it. There's not some manifestation, there's not some hidden Sephiroth Genova bullshit, so who actually did it? No, Arden took a knife, stabbed her in the stomach, and goes about on his fucking day. Then he fucks with Prompto and the rest of the party while on the train. He has these weird, like, mind-manipulating enchantment powers and says, I'm fucking with you and whatever. It turns out Noctis is running after him, and it turns out he was Prompto the whole time. So he forces Noctis to yeet Prompto off the fucking train into the middle of nowhere. Oh, it's just so good. He does the Resident Evil thing. I get the mechanics of Chapter 13 are kind of stupid. But Arden over the intercom telling you you're a fucking putz, come find me, taunting you the entire way, is this weird kind of chilling vibe to it. And then you realize all along, he was what Noctis was supposed to be. He could have been the immortal king. He could have been the one, but Bahamut, he hates Bahamut's guts so much that he cannot die. He has this like inborn virus in him. This evil thing that Lunafreya is able to cure on small doses, but you can't cure what the fuck Arden has. So he has this anger and resentment for hundreds of years because he was the first in the line, or maybe, thousands of years in the line, whatever. You learn things in the DLC that he was a normal, like, Jesus figure. He was a good, upstanding person, but then got corrupted. You see his face. There's a sequence where he's kind of walking towards the camera, and then you hear, I think it's Gentiana, Shiva, talking about Arden, and then you see, like, half of his face turn to this fucking skull that's, like, bleeding black goo, and it's like, ugh, just fucking, and then at the end of it all, he tells Noctis, I was your ancestor. I was going to be the one until Bahamut said, fuck you, you're not the one. So he has an ingrained reason to hate the gods of the world. He takes it upon himself to do what Vayne did, in a more effective way. He just seals Noctis in a crystal, says, you be a good little boy and sit your ass over there. I'm going to take over the world and turn it into shit. So he does the Kefka thing. He does the Kuja thing and turns the world into shit. And then six Ifrit onto the city as your true final boss. Arden still gets his moment in a more cinematic boss fight, but Ifrit just fucking destroys things. He takes over Insomnia years later in a different, like, DLC. He comes to a city and just six Ifrit, another fucking summons onto the place, and he's just cackling the whole way, and it's just oh, it's so fucking good. You realize he's effective in fucking over his own family line. He has so much disdain for what Bahamut took away from him that you almost feel sympathetic in a way, but you know that you can't. But because he's such a charismatic figure, you're kind of like, I just want, you want to get rid of him for everything he's done, but he's still kind of like, not in the Kefka way, not in the Kuja way, in his own unique way. He's succeeded. The fact that somebody had to die to find him across whatever weird dimension to finally get rid of him, but it's a kind of a Xanatos Gambit kind of way. The only way to kill him and purge this fucking disease-ridden person that was tormenting your life was to die. And Noctis, Lunafreya, the entire line, they're gone. He has effectively purged this cursed king line, this Lucius or Kalis family line. I believe it's Calum. But this entire family, done. Bahamut's whole order on things, done. I'm sure Bahamut and the rest of the summons still rule the world, but not in the same way they did before. The line of the kings is completely erased from existence. There is no happy ending in Final Fantasy 15, and that's something that, as much as there's a happy ending in 6, that's why I put Arden at number 1. Because he has this charisma and this look and this presence that is so unique, all the while doing all the effectiveness that still Kuja and Kefka did. All of the myth-making that Sephiroth did, all of the stuff that they did. Arden has this innate presence that, yes, in the era of voice acting, adds a lot. But Seymour couldn't cut it. Vayne couldn't cut it. Bartandalus couldn't cut it. Arden did to me. And again, this was my own list. If somebody else makes this list, they'll probably put Kefka or Sephiroth number 1. I'm not going to complain. Maybe someone will put Kuja number 1, and he has a right to that. I don't think anyone in the top 4 you can argue with. I mean, you can argue with X-Death as being as effective as I thought he was. Or maybe you like Adia and Ultimecia, and he's like, hey, a female villain, that's pretty neat. At the end of the day, this was a personal list. And I think, for me, the intrigue was trying to find a perfect balance of not wanting to say, you're wrong, I'm right, because that's wrong. There are different ways you can interpret different people, much like everybody interprets a different game a different way. I interpret these bosses and their effectiveness in a different way from a different perspective. I still think Arden has something to offer that none of the other characters do. I don't think the first 4 Final Fantasy bosses are all that effective. I don't think 5 is all that. Like, it takes a lot of effort to write a very good character. And Final Fantasy, to an extent, does struggle at making bosses. And sometimes they wuss out and make bad final bosses that don't really stick the landing. But, again, there is a hope that for Final Fantasy 16 or Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth or whatever they keep doing, that they're going to make another Arden, that they're going to make another Kuja or Kafka or Sephiroth. That is always the hope. But that'll do it for me. Like I said, this was an interesting thought experiment. I didn't know what this list would look like until I actually did it and then thought about it. And hopefully I've done enough to satisfy what I'd imagine Exdeath at 5. Arden at 1. Those are some weird fucking ideas, but I think to an extent I've tried to make them make sense. But who knows? It's just an opinion. I can't really express anything other than this was a subjective idea. There's no I'm absolutely right in this discussion, so bear that in mind. But what do you think about the Final Fantasy final bosses or the main villains? Well, that's what the comments are for. But that will do it for me. And I want to thank you guys for this longer episode, and I'll see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.